Next up, I'd like to introduce the managing partner of Spectrum Knowledge, Dr. Pham, who works with dozens of organizations from Fortune 500 to governmental and nonprofit agencies to boost employee performance and strategic effectiveness by conducting interactive training and data-driven research to achieve results. Having completed his doctoral degree at the Cornell University, Dr. Pham's specialties include the areas of culture, organizational development, and leadership. He currently serves as an instructor at the UC San Diego, Rady School of Management, and UCLA, as well as a researcher at the Center for Research on Employment and the Workforce at Cal State Fullerton. He has authored a book entitled Impressive First Impressions, the most important 30 seconds and 30 years of your career, and his work has been featured on national and international media venues such as CNN, MSNBC, the AP, Voice of America, and LA Times. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pham.
All right, as Mina's pulling up the slides, can I get a sense of who's Grant Thornton here? Can you stand, please, if you're Grant Thornton? Go ahead, take visibility, and stay standing. If you're Chase, can you stay standing, please? Chase? All right, first, stay standing, and let's congratulate them and thank them first and foremost. Now, here's the fun part. Mina was able to get a little bit of funding and sponsorship out of them. I'm going to get a little bit of work out of them. So can we pick 2 representatives from each of your companies, please? You're Grant Thornton, miss? Grant Thornton? Okay, and Sir Grant Thornton? Chase? Oh, great. We'll both have you standing up, please. And, well, these are our speakers, so they've had plenty of airtime. So, sir, you're Chase or Grant Thornton? Chase, we'll have you standing up, and miss in the yellow? Grant Thornton, 4 of you, everyone else can sit down. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. We're going to actually ask a question, and it's going to be a business challenge here. And it'll be a challenge involving these 4 participants. So again, raise your hand if you're Grant Thornton. Okay, and raise your hand if you're Chase. Okay, and we'd like audience participation, which is this. I'm not going to tell you the question, so no one will know what the question is yet, but I'd like you to vote based on who you think will get this answer correct. So, Grant Thornton or Chase, you don't know the question yet? You just have to bet on one of these 2 teams here, Grant Thornton or Chase, okay? So, we're going to do vote by standing. So, I'm going to ask for Grant Thornton first, and if you vote for Grant Thornton, I'm going to ask you to stand, and if it's Chase, I'm going to ask you to stand. So, okay, how many of you think Grant Thornton is going to get this question correct? Okay, all right, okay, thank you. How many of you would say Chase is going to get this question correct? Okay, it looks like about 60-40 Chase to Grant Thornton, and it's no accident. I'll sort of tell you why. All right, so here's the question. Oh, the 4 of you need to stay standing. Okay, all right, here's the question. Blind beggar had a brother who died. What relation was the blind beggar to the brother who died? The answer is not the brother. Do not blurt out the answer. So if you know the answer, don't blurt it out, but I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. I'll give these 4 participants a chance to digest. And amongst the 4, once you know, you're certainly allowed to raise your hands, okay? But don't blurt out the answer. And those of you in the audience, if you do know it, raise your hands as you know it. I'm just curious to see in the audience. Keep your hands up. Okay, we've got about, looks like maybe just 5% of the audience so far. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. The 4 of you I've asked to participate, raise your hand if you know the answer, because you'll know if you know the answer. Of the 4 of you? None? Okay, do you want to volunteer an answer, sir? Oh, you can't win if you don't play. Okay, how about over here? Ladies? Go ahead. Don't know? Okay. All right, sir? Okay, and it's okay because typically only 20% of people get this correct, I've seen. Okay, so literally 4 out of 5 chances we won't get it correct. We only have 4, so statistically someone, miss or sir? Sister, okay, great. The answer is the sister. So no one got it, but let's thank our sponsors. Okay, so the answer is the sister. I'll tell you why this is relevant in a second, and why I wanted you to vote also, okay? I'm going to have you a second question here, which I'd like to see who can, don't blurt out the answer to this one, and let's see if you can get this one. So the CEO's son called and said, hurry home, your dad's fighting with my dad. Wait a minute, how can that be? So I'd like you to think about the answer for a minute. You know this one? Okay, well, we'll let one of that, if one of the four folks actually thinks you know it this time, we'll give you a second shot at it. Okay, I'll give you about 5-10 seconds to kind of mull it over, think about it. Okay, within the audience, don't blurt out the answer, but just show of hands quietly. Who knows it? Okay, all right. It looks like, yeah, we're getting a little bit more this time. Miss from Grant Thornton in the yellow, what's the answer? Uh-huh. You're getting it. The CEO is, who's the CEO? The CEO's husband and dad are both fighting, okay? Because the CEO, the easy answer statistically is the CEO is a mother, okay? So in the last one, the blind beggar is a man, and in this one, the CEO is, I'm sorry, the blind beggar is a sister. In this one, the CEO is the mother, all right? So the fact that, you know, actually, how many got both questions correct? Show of hands. Okay, so just if there's a little over 200 people in this room, about 250 people in this room, then we're looking at, looks like about less than 10%, okay? Or roughly no more than 10% for sure. So I want you to think about that. It's okay, I got these questions both wrong the first time I heard them. Now, why is this so important? First of all, if you're to lead and develop strong leadership skills, here's a takeaway. It's actually visibility is credibility. And of course, Chase is going to get more votes than Grant Thornton because Chase, you've got your commercials all over the place. You're a retail banker. Grant Thornton, you're more B2B, right? So by default, Grant Thornton, you just don't have the same, you know, visibility, right? Because you're B2B. It's just, it's oranges and apples. But I want you to think about this for a minute. What if Chase and Grant Thornton were leaders in your own company? If Chase and Grant Thornton were leaders in your own company, who would more likely statistically to get it correct? The question correct? It would likely be the one that has more followers, that has more supporters. I want you to think of it this way. You could just pick up the phone and call your team and let's have a team meeting. And by sheer brute force, right, just if one person has 20 team members, someone else has 10 team members, you've got to, all things being equal, you've got a statistically double chance of getting a question correct. So why is visibility so important? Because part of leadership is being able to take the lead and support something, even though there could be consequences. For example, okay, the Chase folks, you supported an idea. This idea could have fallen flat on its face, right? But it didn't. It absolutely succeeded. So you're betting on something that you do not know exists yet, and you're betting on a person who has come up to you, exerted visibility, shared their vision, and you're betting on a future. You're betting on something that's just going to grow. That's exactly what leadership is. It doesn't exist today, and you have to be visible. Now I want to flip it for a minute, okay? Because here's the other side, is this. A good leader requires that we are aware of our visibility or lack thereof. And why do I say lack thereof? Because I want you to think about it. Why did 90% of this room not get this correct? And me included, first time I heard it. Because we don't think of women as beggars or as CEOs. I want you to look at the Fortune 500, right? There are fewer than, you know, the number fluctuates periodically, but last count, it was 18, 19. I don't think we're at 19, but 18 Fortune 500 CEOs that are women, okay? And women make up half the workforce, yet are approximately under 4% of the CEO population. You look at that. Well, if the theme of this year's conference is manufacturing innovation, can't innovate if we all look alike and start acting alike, right? And so innovation is about new ideas and difference. It's hard to get new ideas when there's too many of us who look the same. So part of it is this. Here's my challenge to you. The fact that 90% of us get this wrong in this room, are we really innovating? Are we really taking the lead? Because we've been warned that BRIC, right, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the Asian countries in Latin America are going to overtake us one day. We've been warned this 20, 30, 40 years ago. The time has come. By 2016, China will overtake us by GDP, they're projecting. Don't know if that prediction still holds, but I'm just saying it's a warning sign. And as our resident economist has said, yeah, I mean, things are shifting back to the US, not because we're doing so great, but because we're cheap. And because we're cheap just means we're not in a leadership position anymore the way we used to be. We're cheap. So, and I hope that leads us to further innovation so we can take the lead. It's not to be negative, it's to challenge us to think about what we're missing here. And I want you to think about this. Those companies with corporate directors who are women are 38% less likely to make mistakes. Okay, I mean, look at the Grant Thornton crew over here. A lot of women here, right, in Grant Thornton. Well, it's kind of, maybe it's a correlation. I have no idea. So it's not that men are dishonest. It's that women offer a different perspective and will look at things a different way. Now, I'm not a woman, so this doesn't benefit me directly, but I am a business owner and someone who actually decides, you know, my staff, they need to be a mix of men, women, international employees. You know, we employ folks internationally as well as domestically. So we need to have this. And when we work with the universities, it's about that kind of diversity because at the universities, we are also, in terms of innovation, you know, we need to be diverse. So this is why, is because people actually have differences in views. And so the blind beggar and the CEO, we need to diversify, and we need to rethink our market leadership. And I used to hear this. I've heard of, you know, presidents and CEOs of subsidiaries, you know, Fortune 500 companies, but subsidiaries based in Asia or Latin America, and they say, we don't get taken seriously. A lot of it was lip service until the last decade, that American CEOs did not take our international divisions as seriously. Well, we are now, because why? The dollar speaks for itself. It's nothing else, or the euro, or whatever, the yuan, whatever currency, that speaks, and that's it. So I want you to also think of this. This year's theme of manufacturing is innovation, right? So mixed gender patents get cited 42% more. And when you're cited more often, there's no guarantee, but it's more likely that your patent is more important because people are citing it, they're talking about it, they're buzzing about it. They're likely to invest in it. And this is now mixed gender. So women alone, their patents aren't cited as often. Men alone, their patents aren't cited as often. So leadership is also about taking people who do not look like us, talk like us, act like us. And that's the hardest thing to do because we like to talk to people we view we can trust, and the easiest ones are the ones who look and act and talk like us, right? And I'll tell you this. Speaking of manufacturing innovation, from 2008 to 2009, our GDP dropped approximately 3%, but patent activity, which is correlated with innovation, it's not guaranteed, but it is a correlation. Although our GDP dropped 3%, our patent activity dropped by 20%, which means we cut a lot of innovation in this downturn. So now we're recovering, which is great, but are we ready for the rebound is my challenge to all of you and all of us, is are we actually going to produce more innovative products because we've cut so much innovation. And America now, if you look at the Boston Consulting Group's index and the Business Week Bloomberg, did you know they have very different metrics, and odd enough, America ranks 7th in both, okay? Singapore's pretty high in one, Switzerland's high in the other, but America, we're ranked number 7, which we're doing pretty well, but we're not number 1. And we've taken a large haircut to innovation. So to think about it that way is that we need to really think about diversity, leadership, and innovation. These all go hand in hand. You can't innovate unless you look different, talk differently, act differently, think differently, come from different backgrounds. So that's how I want you to think about. Now, I want you to think about this, which is methods of persuasion. So first of all, in terms of leadership, I want you to think about how we persuade. Okay, so imagine you have a young son or daughter, and you're sitting in your home, and across the street, you you see an adult in a trench coat clearly dealing drugs. You know those are drugs to your son or daughter's classmate, okay? So your 6-year-old son or daughter says, hey, that's Jill over there, and that man's dealing her drugs, or that woman's dealing her drugs, okay, that adult. How many of you would call, would call the police right away or intervene? Show of hands. Okay, and let's split this. How many of you would personally intervene, and how many of you would call the police? So how many of you would call the police? Show of hands. Okay, keep your hands up for those of you who call the police, okay? All right, great, okay. Now, for those of you who would call the police, or anyone for this matter, I want you to think about the adult that you care about the most. The one adult you care about the most in this world, okay? Picture that person. Now, the person you'd sacrifice for. Now, I want you to go back to this drug scenario. That person dealing drugs is the person you care most about in this world. So, show of hands, how many of you would call the cops immediately? Maybe 1, okay? That number drops a lot. Maybe 2, okay? That number plummeted, right? Why is that so important? Because when it comes to leadership, it's about relationship building. That's why you're here face-to-face. You can't just do this online on LinkedIn and whatnot. You need face-to-face, strong interactions across, people lines, not just internet computer lines. And we're shifting with the millennials now, because I'm hearing this a lot. A lot of the millennials are very aggressive, have leadership instinct and all that, they say, entrepreneurial instinct, but actually not from a face-to-face perspective. So you could say that's great, but when are we going to sign $1 billion check to someone we've never met? I mean, when does that happen? So what is going to happen with our leadership succession in the future? So I encourage you, because most people here don't look under 30. And that's the generation that's going to lead us into our future. Yet, they don't think the way we do, and they're not face-to-face. And this is my pecking order of relationships here, okay? Written proposals, honestly, the proposal's already pretty much decided by the time the proposals hit the desk. But the relationship, most of us will break the law for a powerful relationship, okay? So when it comes to leadership, I want you to think about how relationships trump almost any other type of persuasion. So I'm not going to give you a magic bullet. I have a bunch of science, quick persuasive tactics, which I could give you, but the one thing I would say to leverage is personal relationships. Hands down, the single strongest type of persuasion. Most of us are chasing the new money. Why don't some of us chase the old and familiar money? The ones that know one another in this room. That type is very powerful, okay? Now, one thing I want you to learn, on the other side. Okay, how many of you on the scale, would say, let's take Asians, for example. Is it fair to say that, does anyone here not work with Asians in the workforce? Okay, good. I imagine that's everyone, right? So now we're talking women, let's talk Asians. How many would say Asians are either high risk-taking or low risk-taking, higher or lower than the average American, okay? How many would say Asians are lower risk-taking? How many would say Asians are higher risk-taking, okay? So show of hands, how many would say Asians are higher risk-taking than the average American? Wow, it's like 2 hands? Okay, 2 hands. All right, so just for confirmation, how many would say Asians are higher risk-taking? Wait, some of you aren't voting here, so higher risk-taking. Lower risk-taking? Okay, all right, so the vast majority would say, sorry, I asked the question wrong, but would say lower risk-taking. Now, I want you to put this in perspective, okay? Asians, and I'm going to skip ahead to the data here, Asians now will even more likely lie to preserve harmony. And therefore, when you think about then Caucasians, okay? That's what's critical, is now we look at Asians as low risk-taking. But I want you to think about this for a minute, okay? There's actually a study on Asian gambling addiction, okay? Asians are actually high risk-taking, just not in the traditional social sense. Why? Because gambling is a very closed-door activity. We kind of just do it with fellow gamblers, right? But Asians actually have the highest proportional incidence of gambling addiction than any other group. So if you think Asians are actually low risk-taking, in private, we're extraordinarily high risk-taking. So we need to rethink our paradigm And the MGM Grand, remember how it used to be the Lion's Head Hotel when you used to walk in the Lion's Head? And they kept saying, wait, Asians are such big gamblers. How come they're not coming into our hotel? You know what they found out? Asians thought it was bad luck to walk in a Lion's Head. So they tore down the whole thing. It's not only because of Asians. It needed remodeling anyway. But they built a full body of a lion to attract more Asians. And finally, there's a site, stuff Asian people like, okay? And gambling's pretty high up there, as you can see. There's also, sites, stuff white people like and all that. Look at those. Those are really fun. They're fun sites. Don't take them seriously. But they do have a slight grain of truth to them. And so I'll leave you with this, is, I want to challenge you with this takeaway, which is sometimes leaders appear out of the quietest corners. They're invisible in our own heads. We don't think of women as CEOs. That's why 90% of us don't get this question correct. If I said the word CEO, how many of you honestly would think of a woman before a man in your first instinct, gut instinct, honestly? Does anyone here? I wouldn't, and I hope to change that. But it comes from the quietest corners. And as you saw, from innovation to tax reviews and making fewer mistakes, that makes a big difference. Or men in the workforce, right? I mean, we need even diversity among men. I mean, Asians, Latinos, whatever it be. So, where's this trajectory going? We need to rethink what leadership is, shift it toward diversity, then you could think differently, and then you could innovate. You can't innovate till you start thinking differently. And so this ties in with the economy. This ties in with where we're going in terms of a country and where our future is. So I really want you to just remember those aspects. Leadership is diversity, innovation. Leadership starts with diversity, then leads to innovation. Then we can really move toward leadership. Okay? So I hope you really walk away with that in the short amount of time that I had today. Thank you very much, and I'll take a couple questions. Okay, anyone have any questions? Yes, miss. Great, and there's a lot of tips for this one. But part of it is actually you want to prepare first. Be more prepared than everyone around you. Because here's the thing. We think about how much we prepare for interviews. We don't prepare very hard for meetings. That's your opportunity. That's one. Secondly, to think about, so prepare harder than everybody else, right? Secondly, you can use your naivete, your perceived naivete, even though you might not be naive, you're younger. You're allowed to ask more questions, actually. So, excuse me, I just had a thought here, X, Y, Z. You're sort of allowed to ask a little bit more than most people, and ask these people for advice. You ever notice it's hard to get a meeting with a CEO or CFO, a VP, but it's really easy when you ask them for advice and they talk your ear off? That's the key. Ask for advice, okay? All right, great. Another question? No? All right, we're going to wrap up here, so since we're short on time. Thanks, Mina.